Hi everyone and welcome. Today we are joined by Fyodor Lukyanov, the chairman of the Presidium of the Council for Foreign and Defense Policy. He's also the editor-in-chief for the very popular journal Russia in Global Affairs, and as many also know him, interviewing President Putin every year at the annual Valdai Discussion Club. So welcome back. It's good to have you back on the program.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Hi.
So you've been writing a lot lately about the talks between the United States and Russia in terms of the possibility of finding a new way of cooperating, to some extent, irrespective of what's happened in Ukraine. So again, Trump is a very difficult man to analyze. He's, I guess, unpredictable. He swings a bit back and forth. He has a lot of divisions within his administration. That being said, he obviously has very different objectives than that of his predecessor. So, how are you reading now Trump's comments these days? Do you think it's still possible for the United States and Russia to come to some kind of a peace? And does it require an agreement or even resolving the Ukraine issue?
Uh, that's a good question. I would slightly disagree with the characteristic of President Trump as unpredictable. I think we we know him pretty well since several years. His first term, his in-between term, his term now. And we can say that back and forth in his case means tactics, while objectives and actual line is extremely consistent. He never changes. And if you go back to his statements made 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 15 years ago, his worldview has never changed an inch. So that's very remarkable. You don't find so many political figures with such a record. In case of Ukraine, I think point number one is that people in Russia, those who analyze Trump, I think Mr. Putin as well, assume that at the end of the day, this is his interest to disengage from this issue. It's not because I trust him when he says that he's terrified by bloodshed and he wants to stop fighting. In this particular case, I think he's sincere. But this is, so to say, the entourage. And the real wish expressed by Trump and his inner circle, not all in his team, but his inner circle, is based on the conviction that Ukraine has nothing to do with the United States' vital national interests. And United States should stop participating in that in one or another form. The optimal ideal form is to achieve sustainable peace and, of course, proclaim that as an enormous, brilliant, great success by the great president. Maybe even apply for Nobel Peace Prize in your country. But that's the maximum program. If not, and it doesn't look very likely at this point, then at least to disengage and to minimize risks for the United States from being part of this extremely complicated issue. And coming back to Russian assessment, I think some people believe that if Trump wants it, then there is a broader space for Russia not to make concessions, because this is at the end of the day his interest as well to stop or to disengage. Is it possible to achieve an agreement? Yes and no. What we mean by agreement, that's in these days and this international environment very unclear what a real agreement, how the real agreement could look like. One thing is quite obvious. When the whole process started, I mean, this phone call by Trump to Putin, then the first meeting in Riyadh, and some other technical level meetings, both Russian and American officials said that, okay, we have this Ukrainian stuff, but we have some other or many other problems between Russia and the United States which should be resolved. And we can do it in parallel. And let's look at the easier issues, like, for example, normalization of functioning of embassies in Moscow and in Washington. Let's try to do this step by step and so. As I understand now, nothing happens, and the Ukrainian issue is a core issue. Without anything on this field, we cannot expect any other moves, be it business, be it diplomacy, be it whatever. So that means that at the end of the day, we come back to this process which we see these days, negotiations, or how to call it, meetings between Russians and Ukrainians in Istanbul, and everybody watches, including Trump. I think Trump doesn't want to break with Russia. He passionately wants to be in touch, but of course, at certain point, he can conclude that Putin or Russians or both sides are using him to achieve their goals, and then he might be sad.
Regarding this, well, by the way, let me just say this idea that Trump has consistent objectives and changing tactics. That's actually probably a very, very good point. I didn't actually, yeah, distinguish properly there. But regarding the, if Russia has this calculation that there's no need to make any real concessions because Trump wants this, wouldn't that fail to incorporate that, that Trump kind of stands a little bit alone in the U.S. authorities, that it's going to be very hard for him to sell any deal to his own people? But also, if Ukraine is, yeah, as you say, very correctly, I think the Ukraine is the core issue. It's very difficult to move beyond it before it's solved. What is required now? Is there real possibility to actually meet, because to meet some common ground? I noticed that a lot of the focus, as you have pointed out as well, is on territory. But of course, the territorial issue, it seems to me, is more of a consequence of the failure to resolve a wider problem. So what is actually Russia's demand here, and where could it possibly make concession versus where it most certainly cannot?
Yeah, it's a very tricky picture, and unfortunately, on both sides here as well, but even more in the West and of course in Ukraine, people try to simplify the process and to bring it, understandably. I understand it very well, because to be frank, many are tired of this and want to see some kind of silver lining. But unfortunately, the simplification at this point doesn't work. What do I mean? Um, you ask, and many people ask, what kind of concessions Russia would be ready to do. From my point of view, which might be incorrect because we don't know the whole picture, and the whole picture is actually, to be frank, in one particular mind. So the current stage is not about substance of negotiations. We should separate substance from procedure. It might sound a little bit weird and crazy, but it is not, because at this point we are in a classical diplomatic game, pretty high stakes diplomatic game, game of nerves. Uh, what will be the framework of the future substantial negotiations, which are to come at some point, not yet. If you follow developments in recent weeks, starting from early May and approximately, you can see that Ukrainian side and Europeans who supported and support Ukraine, they tried all the time to enforce their vision, what should be done, how the procedure should look like. First ceasefire, then negotiations. Putin should negotiate himself. The only person with whom Zelensky will speak is Putin. If not Putin, then no one, and so on. What happens in reality? None of Ukrainian and European demands have been considered and fulfilled, of course. Just the opposite. Responding to those demands, without mentioning them, by the way, Putin offers something else, offers a different mode, a different framework. Ukraine is rejective immediately, but then they accept. That happened with these Istanbul negotiations when Zelensky first said that the only one person is welcome, Mr. Putin. If not, forget. Then he said, okay, they will send some technical delegation of no names. We will do the same. And then he sends a delegation which is higher in status than Russian one, and so on. Now, with this ongoing, coming meeting in Istanbul, we don't know whether it happens or not, but it looks like it might be on Monday, June the 2nd. Initial Ukrainian claim was no meeting without memorandum delivered before. Russia said no, and it seems that the meeting will take place anyway. So why I think it's important, you might see it as a stupid Game of Thrones or so, but it's not, because Putin is a legal person with legal background. He believes, it might sound strange to our Western audience, but he believes in procedures and norms. Of course, his understanding of procedures and norms is not the same as the understanding typical for rules-based order, but it is a very clear understanding. That's why he, for example, insists on the issue, on taking into account the issue of legality, legitimacy of Zelensky, his presidential mandate, and which expired, and so on. And I think that Trump and his team, including even persons who are not at all in favor of Russian position, like General Kellogg or Marco Rubio, they actually push Ukraine to accept Russian framework because they understand that the only way to keep it going, is to accept it. If Ukraine will try to impose its own terms, then it will just fail and Russia will stop coming. Why it's important? Because I think that in this particular situation, when both sides are maneuvering before anything substantial will happen, it's very important to see what kind of framework at the end will be applied for these negotiations. Again, Americans seem to believe that any kind of process is better than no process at all. And Ukrainians, despite their unhappiness about this, but they understand, they are experienced enough. They understand that if they follow European advice, that will make their situation worse and worse. If they follow American advice, it might give them chance that Trump and the American team will try to will help them to achieve some goals. And coming back to the question about Russian concessions, again, Trump is consistent, but Putin is very consistent as well. And if you disregard a lot of nuances and a lot of rhetorical statements and details, actually, Russian position never changed from the very beginning, from the pre-war diplomatic game, which started in late 21. Putin said repeatedly to Ukrainians and to the West that we have certain package of criteria and demands. We are ready to discuss. If you are not ready, we will be back after a while, but then conditions will be worse for you. And so far it happens. Each next round is much worse for Ukraine in terms of general situation than the previous one. I'm afraid that this time we will see another incarnation of the same, not the last one. So we will be back to negotiations again after a while, and this while might be a combination of increased military activities, and we see it already now on both sides, while continuing to try to shape this negotiations framework.
Yeah, I thought about that as well. The American just out of pragmatism, if they want to put some pressure to bring the parties closer together, the US doesn't really have any leverage anymore over Russia. They already sent all their weapons and used all their sanctions, so they kind of have to lean on Zelensky and the Europeans. But behind this, US Russia the diplomatic game, of course, there's a lot of different calculations. Of course, the United States has to be a bit cautious about its own domestic opposition. Zelensky, it's limited what he can accept as well. It seems if he would, embrace the American-Russian format fully immediately, he would probably have some big problems with the various nationalist groups, and obviously the Europeans have their own problems. On this continent, all the leaders have been saying, Russia wants to restore the Soviet Union, Putin is Hitler, all of these things. So they kind of painted themselves in the corner where it's impossible to, to again even talk to Moscow. So it's a very difficult situation. Um, but it seems if you're correct, the Americans and the Russians are able to agree on the format and incrementally bring the Ukrainians on board. What about the Europeans? Does it matter anymore, or do you see that Moscow and Washington have more or less agreed that Europe doesn't have to be part of anything?
First of all, how you describe circumstances, it's absolutely correct. Everywhere, be it in the United States, in different European countries, in Ukraine, there are particular domestic situations which put clear limitations on what politicians can do or cannot do. No doubt about that. The problem is that the scale of events which we follow has long ago exceeded over the more or less normal political process. And that was a product of many factors, starting from very bold and big Russian decision to launch this operation, and then equally big decision on the West to try to defeat Russia on the battlefield. And that created another scale, another size of the whole situation. So now refer to particular domestic situations. It's important for understanding, but I'm afraid it's not the main issue which will guide at least the Russian side. Especially given the fact that, unfortunately, Russia has an extended big experience from the past when Russia, at different occasions, has been convinced to take into account domestic situations in different countries, be it, I don't know, United States or Germany or France or whatever, and did it, including Putin did it a couple of times. He tried to accommodate to needs and requests from the partners, and then it has never paid back. So politicians in the West, leaders in the West, they consumed those moves and then forgot about this. So now I'm afraid that Russia will act consistently based on the fact that political atmosphere might change, be it anywhere, but facts on the ground will not. And that's why this very firm insistence stop of fighting only after the basic agreement will be reached. Because the basic agreement, you can change something diplomatically. And to be frank, in Russian tradition, Russian history of Russian diplomacy, there's not so many examples when Russia could gain more after having stopped military activities. So Russian diplomacy usually had to defend and maybe back a little bit, step back a little bit from what military forces achieved. So that's why I think that Putin will be patient and consistent in what he's doing. Of course, looking very closely to what is happening. Look at, I'm sorry, I will go to Europe immediately, but look at the dynamics of the American position. General Kellogg, who is maybe the least Russia friendly person in the entourage of Trump, said 2 days ago in an interview that yes, we understand that enlargement, expansion of NATO is a threat to Russian security. They are fair. They are right. So we can stop it. Could we imagine such kind of statement half a year ago? Not to talk about 5 years ago.
This report that Putin has outlined these conditions for ending the war, including demanding Western leaders pledge in writing that NATO won't expand eastward. Is President Trump willing to make that kind of commitment to Putin that NATO won't expand?
Well, I think it's a fair concern. And we've said that repeatedly. Like we've said that to us, Ukraine coming into NATO is not on the table. And we're not the only country that says that. I can probably give you 4 of the countries in NATO, and it takes 32 of the 32 to allow you to come into NATO. And we've seen other countries say, no, we're not too sure about that. And that's one of the issues that Russia will bring up. And they're not just talking Ukraine. They're talking the country of Georgia. They're talking Moldova. They're talking, obviously, Ukraine. And we're saying, okay, comprehensively, we can stop the expansion of NATO coming close to your border. That's security concerns.
Absolutely unbelievable. And we see it now. So that brings, of course, that fuels Russian. And again, it's not Witkoff, it's not Trump. It's the most hawkish person in the administration, but the person who is hawkish but realist-minded, which is important. And that's why I think Russian leadership, and Putin in the first line, believes that we are at the end of the day on the right track. Very slowly, the price is heavy, but still. About Europe, for now, it looks that Europe lost the course, because it's very difficult to understand what is the goal of Europe, because statements made by different leaders are very controversial and contradict. Merz says one thing, his member of his government denies it, then Merz corrects, and so Macron's tactic has been like this since the beginning. Now, and the previous chancellor of Germany was different. He was much more clear in what Germany will do, what Germany won't do. Merz is trying to adapt Macron's approach to the strategic ambiguity. Okay, fine, but it doesn't contribute to perception of Europe as a very reliable counterpart. And I think that at this point, even Ukrainians start to understand that Europe plays rather a provocative role, instigating continued war, continued fighting, without having in mind to seriously help Ukraine. And that's the difference between Biden America, for example, and Europe today. Because Biden team, whatever we think about them, but they were serious about supporting Ukraine by military and other means. Rightly or wrongly, that's another thing. Europe talks like Biden, but deeds are completely different. And I think everybody understands that Europe is unable to support Ukraine to the extent it would be needed to continue a big war against Russia.
Yeah, I've seen some. You've probably seen as well the kind of remarkable statements, not just coming from people like Arostovich, who's obviously now critical of Zelensky, but even the pro-NATO former presidential candidate Yulia Tymoshenko, which is now essentially accusing the Germans of using the Ukrainians as meat, just to weaken Russia. So it is something happening within Ukraine as well, it seems. But well, I think the internal pressures in U.S., Europe, and Ukraine are evident. I'm curious to what are there any similar pressures within Russia than on President Putin? Because well, internationally, one can see that it seems now, at least in the beginning, big countries were a bit ambiguous what position to take once this could go either direction. But now that it's becoming evident that Russia has is winning or has won this war, you see countries from China to Serbia, they become less ambiguous in leaning towards Russia. On the other hand, more confidently, at least, not sending the weapons and such to the opponent. On the other hand, you see countries like Germany now seemingly contemplating or going into a direct war almost with Russia by sending these Taurus missiles. But on the domestic sphere, especially, is there any pressure? I mean, I'm assuming there's a lot of people who want an end to the war. On the other hand, on the other side, you might see a lot of people who would be very hesitant to accept any excessive concessions. Again, as you said, after all the suffering that Russia's also gone through, that it won't give away too much in a deal which doesn't necessarily end the war finally, but could be another Minsk agreement. Where is the pressure coming on Putin, if there is any pressure, though?
Frankly, I don't see any pressure on Putin. As you know very well, the political system in Russia is different than in liberal democracies. I will never say that public opinion does matter here. Just the opposite. It's very important. And those who take decisions, including the president himself, they monitor what people think and feel on the daily basis. That's the pollsters. It's like in the United States almost now here. Pollsters are those who are the most important people. And I think it's very correct and very fair in this force majeure situation as a war. But so far, as I can understand and as I can judge based on what I know, there are no signs of any leverage which can be applied by anybody on Putin, pushing him to accelerate the peace deal. Not now. I don't know what will happen half a year after or a year after, because situation is changing. Everybody understands, including the president, understands that Russian economy is robust, but sanctions work. Sanctions, of course, create troubles for economy, and military spending, which contributes to significant growth and success of certain branches of economy, they have backside, of course, and sooner or later, Russia will need to address economic problems, no doubt about that, but not now. So at this point, and this point is clearly decisive, I think that both political and economic consolidation of Russia is enough to keep it going without necessity and without need to take abrupt decisions, so unexpected or game-changing decisions. And that's very important for Vladimir Putin, because, as I mentioned, he is extremely patient person. So I remember the reaction of the whole audience at the Valdai Discussion Club in October 22, when the military situation for Russia was, to put it mildly, very bad in Kharkov, Kherson region, and so on. And of course, when he met this audience, people wanted very much to see how he feels. And he was absolutely calm, relaxed, and very positive, actually, which shocked many people. And I, as a person who was close to Putin on the stage, I received a lot of questions. Don't you believe that he just is detached from reality? He does know what happens. No, it was not the case. He knew what happened, but he was so much committed to the idea that what Russia and what he himself was doing was right historically, that he was absolutely sure that this bad stage will be replaced by the better stage. And now, 3 years after, we see that he was right. And that brings him certainly to the conclusion that patience and resilience is the best policies today. I don't see this on the other side, because both Trump and Ukrainians are really impatient. They hope to conclude it soon, and we will see what will happen. Of course, Russia has disadvantages as well, but in this situation, I guess that Putin's approach is more solid and stable.
Yeah, well, that seemed like a place in society, one in Russian society, a question comes up as well. This why not finish it quickly? But I guess this yeah, the slow and steady, as you said, has been working. So
No, you
anyways,
know,
yeah,
just one thing. I think we discussed it with you in one of previous podcasts. I just remind our audience the basic difference. So people in the West believe, based on the experience of Western countries in previous conflicts, in previous wars, in the 1990s and 2000s, that the result of the war should be exit strategy, how to stop it, how to withdraw. And that was the case in Iraq, that was the case in Afghanistan, and so on. For better or for worse, the Russian position, Putin's position is not this. It's not about how to end. It's about how to win, politically, militarily, and that's completely different approach, I must say.
so the overarching objective then, is it still to, well, essentially put an end to this to the post-Cold War security architecture? Well, if you define it as incrementally pushing NATO military infrastructure closer and closer to the Russian border, is this effectively what the Putin wants to achieve by either diplomatic or military ends, or
Absolutely. That's another long discussion
yeah,
whether success in this war or victory over Ukraine, let's assume that it might happen, whether it will finally settle the issue about European security, I'm not sure. But certainly it's seen as a crucial element, and it's seen, the Ukrainian issue is seen as the most vital thing about immediate Russian security. Maybe not the whole security architecture in Europe, but at least to profoundly lower risks for Russian security, which those risks are associated with the Ukrainian membership in American-led alliances, not necessarily NATO, it might be something else. But whether the biggest goal is achievable, that's a matter of discussion. But the more realistic goal, maybe.
well, it's a topic we could discuss next time. So yeah, thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.